All right, this is our first ever podcast, and tonight the special edition is for Steve Arce, my brother, who has just turned at the tender age of 40 years old. And one of the biggest reasons why I want to do this for him is because I don't want Steve's career or his memories to be those cliched statements and jokes to his kids about what he accomplished and how good he was. I would love this to be for not just for Steve's kids, but who knows how far this podcast is going to reach. But I would like more kids to hear about this story because in my most humble opinion, I think that apart from maybe a handful of players, that Steve Arce has been the best player to come out of Windsor, Ontario, full stop. And I just want to discuss tonight with my co-host why Steve and how it came to fruition. I want to talk about his beginnings. I want to talk about the years that maybe we believe that made him and just the extent of what he was able to do. Again, this is more of a homage to Steve in the most humble form and the best way I could think possible. That's going to involve a little bit of comedy and a little bit of insight to what he's accomplished. So with me tonight is Mike Vanella, who is one of my best friends in life, one of Steve's best friends in life, and Mike has such a great way with words and making you understand just how impactful certain moments in history have been, both in the soccer world and just in memories in general. He always hits the nail on the head. That's one of the big reasons why he is here tonight. So, Mike Vanella, say hello.
Hello, it's good to be here. You know, we're in your basement. I gotta say this: we're in your basement on bday, and I was digging for inspiration. Not that I needed any, but on just reliving in the past and trying to remember not only our lives as friends and with Steve, but our soccer lives together. And boy, coming down these stairs, it just all flooded back to me. I mean, I think I said out loud in the kitchen to your mom, who's not even here, about, a ham and cheese sandwich that she would always make. I mean, it's just, that was what we ate before we put on our cleats, or I put on your brother's cleats or your cleats to go to Remington Park to play soccer, just to do anything together. And I mean, we're 40 now, and just time has passed, and to be back down here talking to you, it reminds me of when we were 15 years old. No joke. I mean, and watching soccer on the TV, listening to your dad. I mean, this is sort of the impetus.
Is this the optimal place for a Windsor soccer podcast?
Well, yes, absolutely, 100%. It's the only place for a Windsor soccer podcast, because there's not these walls have seen and heard far too much, and it's absolutely the right place to sit down and talk about soccer, because it was the epitome of soccer when soccer was, and the access to soccer was, so scarce. I mean, we all came here, sat around your couches, and watched soccer together on grainy TV feeds.
Yeah.
And we're dating ourselves, but this is what I remember. I mean, the memories are, I could tell you where we were sitting, what corner, what size the TV was. It's just, it brings back a lot of special memories. So anytime I get a chance, or there's an excuse to sit in front of you and talk about soccer, let alone our our friendship and your brother, I'm good to go.
Well, thanks for that, Mike. And I am, of course, falling back into nostalgia too. I'm thinking every time you walk down the stairs to come see Steve and I, there was always some smart-ass remark waiting for you from my dad, followed by a belt on the back of his head from my mom. And the memories just don't stop in the basement. But again, thanks for coming. And I hope you enjoy the whiskey.
Yeah, it's actually
brought to you tonight by Jameson.
Did they pay for this?
They may, who knows, or I may be paying something a hefty fine for mentioning their name. But all in all, about Stevie, I don't know why I chose to do this, or chose this kind of a platform to do it. Maybe because he's turning 40. Well, he turned 40. But again, it's the best way, even for myself, to recollect how it all began for him and share with the guys as well. And, Steve's family, of course, his beautiful wife and his beautiful kids, for them to hear these pretty cool anecdotes. So, again, we hope you all enjoy this. But that being said, I want to start with the early years for Steve, because, the jokes aside, whatever is being told to Colin, Diego, and Alex of how Steve's beginnings were in the game, I'm not sure how far back you remember about, seeing Stevie play or whatever back in the House League days. Do you remember?
I remember. Well, I sent you that picture of just you, myself, and Zaylon. That I started late. My foray into soccer was late. So the early days, if you're talking, 7, 8, 9, I think I obviously wouldn't have any recollection. Once we started to hit 10 and became friends, that's when I met you and would come in. And that's where I was introduced to really this soccer family. And really how good you and your brother were. So it was around 10 that I remember two left-footed brothers, and one I was playing with, and the other one was I was playing against.
Yeah, that's right, for Nantes Sports.
Yeah.
Well, I'll go a couple years deeper than that. Steve and I always felt like we're always on the same team because of my dad mostly. When he first started coaching House League, Steve at one point was a bit too young to play. And that's when I was on Knights of Columbus. I always remember this. But, when Stevie first came onto the scene, I think the first year was Franco's Pizza. And we won the little, was it Tom Hillis? Mm-hmm. We won a Tom Hillis tournament against Byron Larson's team, which was Central Park Lodge for all the Windsorites I can remember.
His father, rest in peace. Did John pass?
I'm not sure if he passed away.
Anyway.
Here's hoping he didn't, but...
Yeah.
I still remember that. And Stevie started off with it as a defender.
He was a memorable figure in that era.
Yeah,
That's why I mentioned that.
Yeah, he was. He was omnipresent on those fields at that time. But I remember Stevie starting off as a defender. And I remember him being completely and utterly disinterested with the game of soccer. I remember one time leaving the goal net where he was playing goalie. And he ran off to go to the Dickie D guy, the guy who was cycling on the bike. Another time, my mom told me that he was picking flowers, just didn't give a toss about the play or anything like that. And, when I think about that, you think about the talent, that he had, you think about the desire that he had, it's so hard for me to go back and think about, when did it turn around for him? When did he start becoming Steve Arce? Because he had... I can tell you, it was 4 years of House League, and 1 year he said, "To hell with it, I'm not playing with Julio Arce as my coach." And he went to go play.
How old was he?
No. Oh, you know what? He must have been 8 or 9 because he went to go play with Anthony Jazz at Shoppers Drug Mart, and I was on Nantes Sports Shop. That was the year.
Yeah, I think that was.
So it was that year. So he would have been 9, and from then on. I don't think that was when he first started developing the Steve style of play. I have in my mind a moment. I got this specific moment where I think things turned for him. And I remember, Mike, we were in Argentina. It was 1990.
Your first trip there?
Second trip.
Okay.
Second trip there, and Steve paraphrasing for him, but he loved my two older cousins, Fernando and Grover, and we'd always be playing soccer. We'd always be playing in what they call in Spanish potreros, which is like on a corner block of every street. There's like a little dirt patch, and kids flooded it. And in our particular area, in that barrio where my aunt lived, there was always kids there, nice kids too. And that was the first time in my life, Mike, I ever saw the 360, the Zidane. So that was in 1990. And I still remember the kid who did it. And it wasn't long before I saw Steve do it. And he was doing it in Argentina. And we were there for 3 weeks, that particular visit. And when I saw him do it, I almost got pissed off at him. Because I thought, why are you even trying that? What gives you the right to try what they're doing? But his coordination and his ability to mimic, as soon as I saw him do that, I thought he'd turn a corner. Because it was at that
moment. 12 years old?
No. I would have been 12 then.
He would have been 11.
He would have been 11. And when I think about it, it makes sense. Because the year after that, I was at Tecumseh with Phil Ferrante. And, just doing the typical Windsor thing, floating about and stuff. And that's not a nod to Phil Ferrante. And looking back, I actually thought he was a good coach. But one of the big turning points is when Steve came back and he was trying all those things. He was becoming a bigger factor in grade school soccer, bigger factor in competitive soccer. But I think it was when he was introduced to Dave Sparks, rest in peace. He was one of the nicest guys I think you'd ever meet in soccer. The city of Windsor, globally, if you will. But, he was a guy from Coventry, England. Had the greatest mullet you've ever seen. We all played with Paul Sparks. He was just as great of a guy. But Dave, everything that Steve did that involved creative play, whether it was chipping the ball over the back four, nutmegging somebody, he was all over Steve. He loved him. And everything Steve did, a great pass, a through ball, a shot that was missed, it was unbridled, how would I say this? It was unbridled compliments. And I think that pushed Steve to another tier.
He realized at that moment that he was maybe a little bit better than the rest.
I think so, because...
And it gave him more confidence to continue to be better.
Yeah, because he never ran as the run-of-the-mill guy, really, in anything he did on an athletic level. Every time he did something in athletics, he was different than the rest. I remember him playing basketball.
He was always a bit unorthodox, but but efficient.
Well, you remember watching him playing basketball.
Yeah, he was unorthodox.
Right. But he was a good passer of the ball, right?
He slapped the ball as he dribbled, but yet he would pass the ball. He'd be the best point guard around.
Well, I remember you asking Mr. Patrician, who are the best passers of the basketball you've ever seen. And he mentioned Steve's name, and he mentioned, is it Kisesi?
Mm-hmm.
Do you remember that? Mm-hmm. I remember when you told me that, I was taken back. Because I thought to myself, wow, there's something here that's ready to kind of explode.
So what you're saying, back in the day, like when you were younger, just to get back to at the younger age, like 7, 8, 9, he was average.
Yeah, he just went on for the sake of
probably still above skill level in terms of his ability to touch the ball and pass the ball. I mean, we're probably better than most, but yeah, he didn't shine above the rest as much. He
didn't shine, and to his credit, though, he was always playing a year up.
Yeah.
Right? Mm-hmm. Even with the year that he seeded from my dad for the house league, he was still playing a year above. So I think when he started playing with kids his own age, going back to the Dave Sparks year where he joined FC Nationals from Tecumseh, he was playing against guys his own age for the first time in his career. He's used to higher pace, bigger guys, whatever. And then all of a sudden, he just starts coasting, running the show, right? And on that team, you had Gervier, Hilaire, Dominic Roma.
Phenomenal right back, Hilaire. Hilaire was phenomenal.
Yes, he was. especially the interview against Wallaceburg, Hilaire. That was the best thing you've ever done.
That's for another show.
Yeah, no, but it was a good squad, and I actually, Frank Pacheca, Gino Paciocco.
Yeah.
But and give credit to Hilaire. If it weren't for Hilaire, Steve would have never made that venture over to nationals. And
why is that? What did you do?
Well, because he was always kind of stuck with me, and not that Steve wanted to be stuck with me, but we had a pretty strict schedule after school, the banks.
Yeah.
And then if it was a practice night, we either did the banks afterwards or we hauled ass and did them before. So for us, it was more of a convenience thing for Steve and I to be on the same team.
Yeah.
So we didn't have to go to the far stretches of Ontario or Michigan. So in that regard, I actually think Hilaire, Dave Sparks, the Argentina trip, all that stuff, I think that was a pivotal year in 1991, 92, 91, when it all just changed for him. I thought he started to become scary to me. And I remember in grade 9, the high school year, I remember playing forward for Steve in March. And I think I grabbed 6 goals that year. And I thought, oh, this is great. I'm a rookie. I can't do anything wrong. Even if I have the worst game in the world, this is great. And I remember, I think it was Paulo DiCarlo. He came up to me, he goes, hey, he goes, I hear your brother is coming here too next year. I said, yeah. He goes, is he any good? And without hesitation, I said, he's way better than I am. And then I remember it spread like wildfire. Gus Muscatello came up to me in my locker room. He says, you have a brother and he's way better than you. And I said, yeah, but yeah. I'm not trying to be humble here or whatever, but I don't feel like I turned into a good player until I hit my younger 20s. What we were doing in high school was at a comparative level. So I remember these guys spreading the buzz, spreading the word, and I thought, shit, am I making too much pressure here for Steve? Because when he comes on the scene, I had no pressure. When he came on the scene, he had tons of pressure. And I remember his first high school year. I thought he was, along with Steve Pato, the best player on the team.
You're the best players in the city.
Yeah.
I mean, in grade 9. I mean, that's how good you talk about that jump from, when you remember, you're talking 11 to 13 when he probably came into high school.
Yeah.
And by the time, grade 8, grade school, it's tough to measure, at that level how good somebody is because there's a lot of, non-soccer players that you're playing against.
Yeah.
But once you come into high school on a citywide scale where anybody who's playing high school of all ages, now you're not playing in the same age. You're playing sort of your boy amongst, quote unquote men. So to speak.
Yeah, but you're right.
Then you and not only that, everybody had years of experience playing soccer. They were established, they were developed or underdeveloped, whatever you want to call it. But when he came on, I mean, it was very quick that everybody realized that this kid was
something special.
Yeah, there was nobody in that league, in his league, and that was in grade 9. And I remember that from the days we went to practice. And I mean, I had exposure to it prior to, so I knew, to your point of nobody really understanding who was coming the next year. They only heard rumors based on what you were saying. I knew what was about to come. Mm-hmm. I knew, what he was going to bring to that team because that team was a very good team.
You talking about Holy Names?
Yeah, I'm talking about Holy Names. I'm talking when he entered high school. And I think that's what put him on the map kind of in the city. And high school just does that, right? Because you're exposed different players from different teams playing on one school and they're playing against each other. So that's really where I think in back in that day, because leagues weren't as strong or you weren't going across the U.S. the way you are now. But that's where I think people started to really learn about your brother.
Yeah.
And I mean, I've got a whole opinion.
Do you remember
I got a whole opinion on that and through his high school career and leading up to it, but I'll wait for...
But do you remember a moment in that grade 9 year, and I'm not talking about the subtle touch past Johnny Nacarado, But don't you? I want to see if you can remember a certain moment that I can remember against high school where he hit one of the nicest goals I've ever seen him hit.
So the one against St. Joe's. I mean, but he'd already been. And that was in the final,
right?
But he'd already been in. We've already played all those games prior to, so he was already experienced by the time he hit that game, and that was the final game and the city title, which we can get to. But the whole grade 9 year, you had a grade 9 kid. This first time that I saw in any sport that I played throughout my 5 years in high school, and I played 3 sports for 5 years, that I saw a grade 9 kid come in and influence a team the way he did. And basically lead a team, the way he did. By the end of the year, he was the go-to guy. Everything went through him. There was other good role players, but really you got to understand. And then Steve Pato, obviously at the top, was magic, and they were an incredible combination. And I'm sure really that did a lot of good for Steve Arce because you had him, who had that same level of soccer IQ. The other guys were really good players and had a lot of history, but not as developed as in terms of their mind and their soccer mind, the way you saw Steve Pato and Steve Arce. And so I think, looking back, I mean, for Steve Pato to have made the sacrifice to come back for a 7th year.
It was a big sacrifice.
Come back to Holy Names to mentor a young Steve Arce, I think did a lot of good for Steve Arce, because it was the first time in probably a long time that Stevie looked up to a player, and maybe even probably for sure, knowing your brother, thought he was better and was able to learn from him.
Right.
I know your brother learned from a lot of guys, but not many on the same pitch as him. I mean, he was the one guy that I think maybe one of the first guys that Stevie learned from and sort of looked up to and said, hey, I want to play on that level with a guy like that. That's the guy who can play on my level. And so I just remember that whole year, Stevie just evolving and cementing his place in sort of high school folklore as this young kid, as a grade. Again, you didn't see
feared nobody.
He feared nobody. No. But grade 9, coming in and being as influential as he was, and what you realized is like how mediocre and average everybody else was in soccer, and what a good soccer player looked like at a young age.
Yeah.
And that's what I think he showed. He was the first, for me, in that era, really, really good elite high school player at that age that came in and really made a name for himself he was making waves. I remember that. And then again, the fitting end was the goal against St. Joe's, which sort of was Cinderella-esque, right? I mean, that you couldn't have drawn up a better story. The rookie scores the winning goal against this seasoned team. I mean, that video is etched in my my memory.
That's right,
forever. I mean, it's my youth. It's it's all we had. All the pressures of life and children and all those things. Today, that was it. Getting geared up for a game like that, and to watch him, a close buddy, shine like that on that stage in front of that many people in a high school game as a grade 9 was, again, you didn't see that very often. I don't think you saw it subsequently afterwards.
No,
where there's been that sort of level of dominance.
No, I remember the goal he scored against Herman.
So which one were you talking about?
We won that game 2-0, and it was a ball that bounced across. I still remember this. His right shoulder, and it was a high bouncing ball. It wasn't like it was bouncing perfectly onto his left foot, and he let it drop and let the natural inertia for the whole ball to bone thing worked for him. But the way it flew off and the technique that he showed, top bins on a good goalie, on a tough Herman team, and he's in grade 9. And I just thought to myself, this is it. This is all going to be taken off. I just thought to myself, from that moment on, Stevie's going to be in his own orbit, because, and I fast forward to the OFSA and how quickly he matured. We're playing against Holy Cross, that infamous game, right?
That was grade 10. Yeah.
We were in grade 10. That was grade 9 for him.
Oh, obviously, yeah, okay.
And
of that year.
Stevie hit the tying goal. Do you remember that? On an indirect kick. And it was to tie the game. We lost 3-1. So he tied the game.
Mm-hmm.
But I remember when he scored that, and he hit a rope. He didn't celebrate. He didn't go on an individual run celebrating. He ran right to the bench, and I thought he looked 2 inches taller when he did that. I just thought, this is my little brother's team now. This is his team. As I'm looking from the bench, I'm going. But no, I thought that was a real big moment for him, and not to, do a summation on his high school career. Just after grade 9, he got all-star after all-star after from grade 10 and up. But
he was the best player in the city at that age.
I think, yeah, when he was in grade 10, he was by far the best player in the city.
Yeah, there was no,
and people knew it.
Yeah,
and everybody knew it. And I remember when we went to Argentina, Mike.
What was that? That was
95. So that would have been
9 and 10.
No,
or 10
our
and
grade
11?
11 year.
Yeah,
would have been the year we went to
going
Argentina.
into grade 11, correct?
Yeah, the first club we try out for is this club called Club Argentino, and it's a big club in Mendoza.
So this was the time that you guys are going, okay, let's make the sacrifice. Let's see if we got it. Let's go to Argentina and see if it sticks. If we like the environment, if we can try out for a team, and maybe stay down there.
Yeah, and I think we got led by that because.
What was the impetus? Who drove that? Like who?
My dad, but we had gone up to Toronto a couple times to train with the provincial team. I had trained twice with the U17 national team, and Steve and Hilaire were with provincials. But there was
excuse me.
No, because they didn't have.
Steve needed a ride.
No. Stevie. There wasn't a national team for his.
I'm saying Steve needed a ride, so Hilaire was on the team.
No. Hilaire was one of the prospects they picked up from nationals from the year before.
Well, there you go.
That's right.
It's just indicative of our Canadian system, that they fucking thought
Gumby
Hilaire Kaliki was one of their prospects.
What's funny? After we went up there, and it was nice. Well, I think we only went up once, the three of us together. But it was nice. It was like a Windsor. It was an us versus them feeling. But again, in those little things, those tryouts, Stevie didn't give a toss about anybody. He didn't care. All the arrogance from the Toronto players, he just brushed off aside. There was nothing to it. But
how do you perform? I vaguely remember
it was all running.
His time. It's always been that. But in the provincial time. But let's get back to Argentina. Sorry, and then I want to talk about.
Yeah.
Argentina, you guys go. So you're training there in Ontario, with the provincial team in some contacts as back home in Argentina. Says, hey, come back to Argentina. Or come to Argentina and we had always clubs.
My dad always had a plan, but when we were going up to Toronto, one of the coaches was Juan Manuel Vilches from Argentina, and he was from Mendoza, and he told my dad, I think they have what it takes. They should go. So if he would have said that, I don't necessarily think we would have went with such gusto, to go do it. Because Steve and I were crapping ourselves. That was a hard thing to do.
Do you remember?
I remember every second, Mike. Every second. From the moment we went into the airport, we both had on FC Nationals jackets, and it was during the time of the Pan Am Games. So you had athletes from all across the world coming into Buenos Aires, to Ezeiza Airport. And Steve and I land there, and I remember hearing some English journalist there. He goes, I don't know where they're from. They look like a football team, though. Go grab them afterwards and ask a question. That's how insane the scene was. And Steve and I were just loving every second of it, right? And we loved every second of it until we got to Mendoza. And, we had to receive a soccer education. But this is the difference between Steve and most other people. We get to the club, and the trainer asked me, ¿De qué posición jugás? ¿De qué número sos? Which means, what position do you play? What number are you? And me thinking literally, I'm wearing number 17 at the time for Teutonia or Nationals or wherever I was. And I said 17, and I remember he looked at me and says, "Why are you here then?" And Steve right away pops up and says 10. So right away, he's switched on to the fact that, okay, no, I'm going to figure this out. And me, I'm like a turtle trudging through mud to understand everything that's going on. And so after the first 2 days with Club Argentino, the coach right in front of my brother and I say to my dad, he looks at me, he goes, he's okay, but I have a lot of players like him. And he looks at my brother, he goes, I don't have a lot of players like him. The club doesn't have a lot of players like him. So we're in one of the hotbeds of soccer in South America, right? And this guy, he must have been in his 60s at the time, to give a compliment like that to a little Canadian kid coming into the barrio, Mike, to play against these other guys. Again, it was a testament to how well he was doing. So because I was politely told to F off, Stevie, I feel bad for him, because that club was better than the club that we went to next. The club we went to next was called Murialdo. And I remember my cousin showing me on a diagram, because, I need help. All the positions, what numbers they were, and I memorized them, and we were going through it, and it started clicking for me. And then they really liked me, and they kept me. And my team was much better than Stevie's team. But Stevie was, again, number 10 on Murialdo. And, when I'm talking about these kids that we're playing with at the club, Mike, they had nothing. They came with the same clothes every day to training. One of the most embarrassing moments in me and Steve's career, we both said it, that one day it rained in Mendoza.
And with soft studs?
Yeah.
Yeah.
And we put on 6 studs. And I was mortified from the looks on their faces towards us. Because half of the guys that are looking at us, I couldn't lace up their boots. And you're embarrassed to have more than what they had. Especially when they're so genuine and kind. It was awful. But that being said, again, the compliments that he was getting, what he was doing to those kids, we're talking about Argentina here. We're talking about kids that would have had an opportunity to move on if they would have had their own resources.
So what happened there? What was in the end? What, like, you guys were
spending?
How many times you speak?
We were there for 6 months. No, sorry, 6. We were there for 6 weeks.
6 weeks. I remember you guys left for a while.
Yeah, we were there for 6 weeks. We the intention was to go for 3 months, so we made it halfway. But the official reasoning was we couldn't get our IDs to play in a league, so we just would have been training the whole time. Mm-hmm. But the real reason, Steve and I wanted to come home.
Yeah.
It was getting too much. We were living in a house no bigger than this basement at that time with 10 people. And I can remember Steve at nighttime, because we were in a bunk bed. Like, how great would Taco Bell be right now? How great would McDonald's? And we go through the whole list over and over. And then the nail that kind of, sealed the coffin was my mom sent a letter. And I still remember the letter. How much she misses us, how much she's proud of us. You think about it. These days, to not speak to your mom when you're that far away on a different continent, maybe once every 2 weeks, right, via phone, and that's when you had to go get a calling card to do it, and it was letter. There's no emails, there's no texts, there's nothing like that. And I still remember that, and it kind of, Steve and I,
every boy needs a mother.
Oh.
They need their mother, especially teenagers.
Yeah, so I mean that was it. It sealed it for us. We're like, no, we let's go back. And
could you have stayed?
I think we could have stayed, provided that we're in a different situation with housing. I think it would have made a big difference.
But I'm saying, could you have stayed and played? The clubs would have kept you.
Yeah, they would have kept. One particular game, I got offered to play for the older team. I scored 4 goals in front of the older coach. I was playing number 9, me, a center forward. But that was only after I figured it out. And I wussed out. I said no. Because I still didn't feel ready enough. And, that's a big telltale reason why you don't make it as a player. Because a real player would have said, yeah, let's do it. So, I think that manifestation, being away from home, being away from your pals, after that length of time, it just weighs on you. And you think, no, this is not for me. And then, so that was it. So, going back to segue into all this, Steve's high school career, all the championships that he won, all the All-Stars the nominations he got, the ridiculous things he was doing with FC Nationals at the time, playing in a Toronto league, were also impressive.
He was starting to stand out provincially and get on and he was the best player on Nationals, and then started to sort of really make a name for himself. With other coaches and teams.
Oh my God!
In the league,
I remember him dancing around Woodbridge, Missouri, at Windsor Stadium for fun.
I remember that game.
Scored a hat trick.
I remember that game.
Ran the show, and the other team didn't have an answer. I don't think most teams. The only team that they got smoked by was that Scarborough Malvern team, Malvern Magic, and they were just a different. they were like Martians, but the rest of the time. That Nationals team was pretty serious.
It was a good team, yeah.
It was really good, but not to drop everything off, but I want to get to a really important quote that's probably going to segue us into the later years for Steve. And again, not to cut everything short, for those who don't know the things that Steve achieved in his career, not to gloss over everything, but it was countless MVP awards, countless All-Star nominations, first team, high school, all-city.
He was always the best player.
He was always the best player, and a lot of people forget about this. Stevie was playing in the men's division when he was 16 years old. Senior
better
men's
player there too.
Senior men's A, and he learned a lot there too, because at that time Windsor soccer was somewhat decent.
Well, that's when I thought he started to develop. Sorry, I don't know where you're going, but just to interject. But that's where he started to develop the attitude that maybe turned off, particularly the older people, the older players. And
you think he turned them off?
Well, no, they just started to form opinions of him, and I think those opinions of him were he was a young kid, he was a little shit, he was cocky, he's never gonna make it, and I'm good right now. Just offered me whiskey. He's never gonna make it. All the things that people who are
bitter with the
lesser than will say about somebody who is younger, maybe more skillful, certainly smarter in terms of being on the field. And I think that's really what set him apart, and I'll get back to that, was, and once there's somebody that that is, again, younger, smarter, more skillful comes in, they're ultimately going to be labeled as, not good enough, too weak, cocky, will never make it. They get put in that kind of box, and I think he got put in that box. You sit there and go at an early age, but 16, is that an early age? Whatever the age was. So he started to, again, make a name for himself. He made a name for himself in high school, coming out as a grade 9, then with FC Nationals and his peers across the province, and then stepped up sort of regionally and locally in the men's league, and that's where he started to really either gain the respect of or piss people off, I guess, or what's the word? Again, people were just jealous because you had all these older guys who played their whole lives, thought that they were better than they were, and they were playing against a kid that they'd never played against, and he was way better than them at the time, doing things that they could never possibly do, and they didn't know how to react because those guys were, you had some better players and all that, but those guys were probably all on the same sort of level as each other, give or take, some good, some less so. But again, you got a 16-year-old who's now playing, a boy amongst men, and making a name for himself. It rubbed people the wrong way.
You talking about the time when Steve told Steve Calzavera that he was a has-been?
Whatever. That was one of many.
I remember
and
Rick
Steve Calzavera was a nice guy,
Steve,
and probably wasn't even one of those guys that shit on
no,
Steve.
he wasn't.
But it was moments like that, and what the competitive spirit that Steve had drew from guys like that. I mean, that's what he did to light fires.
What do you think Rick Cluse? How big of a factor Rick Cluse played in
Steve's career? I mean,
the senior development.
I think I wasn't really close into I wasn't in that Nationals world with those guys, but from afar, from the periphery, every kid needs a coach that's going to that's going to be a mentor, that's going to lead them. I think Rick was, for Steve in the city at the time, what Steve probably needed for his confidence, for his skill level. Steve was what Rick needed to make himself feel like he was a good coach.
Well,
so and he was a good coach.
Yeah.
But
I remember Rick strategically getting Dave Flay involved, Mike. And one year we had a B team, and we were 15, 16. And I remember Rick Cluse telling Dave Flay against Windsor Serbs, saying, "Hey, if they go after Stevie, you make sure you get in right away. He's going to need protection. He's going to need help." And
this is with the older group.
No, this is when you were playing with Rose City.
B? Or
it was when all the young kids played in the B division.
Yes.
Remember that?
Okay.
And our team, we had a great team, and we ended up winning the league that year. We lost one game, but I remember anytime we played Croatia, Serbs, where Steve was going to get it in the middle, Rick always was 2 steps ahead with regards to the protection. And we had Dave Flay, we had Dave Rivelis, we had just a lot of wisdom and experience, but I think it helped Steve. I think it protected him a lot to go and do what he wanted to do. So
and Rick, back to Rick. He was a good. He was a part of Steve's life, even in the youth, sort of growing up. That Steve needed to sort of because really Rick was at the time in this city the only guy that had assisted, the only guy that made soccer legitimate. Mm-hmm. He legitimized of coaching. He legitimized sport.
He was the only serious
He was
coach
more
here.
advanced as a coach than any other. He was the only real. I hate to say real. He was the only guy who, at least, you thought he knew what he was doing, and he did. But there weren't many recluses, and so he took kind of Stevie under the wing. I think Rick did a good job in sort of developing Steve's character, letting him play that free role, letting him sort of take leadership roles and play the game the way Steve wanted him to play. I mean, he didn't really rein him in that much, didn't need to. Right. He kind of just let him be free. And I think Steve needed that. But again, Rick was, at that time, the only real coach of any credibility in this city, from what I remember. Maybe I might be wrong.
Listen, I agree.
But I don't know that there were. Now, you give it today, coach education, more awareness on in the game, and just more attention to it. and more education, then yeah, you're going to develop some more, equally good coaching, or just more of.
Right. But no, I'm glad you hit upon something which is going to segue us into the next thing here, because I often wonder if Rick's treatment of Stevie, being that liberal with him, giving him all the creativity, was the set Steve up perfectly for not a collision, but a different world and a baptism of fire with the Canadian national team. And I want you to
just like any kid growing up being the best in his playground, then being exposed to this whole other world, reality starts to set in to go, do you have what it takes? I'm the best at home, but am I even on this, on the level of these guys? And what is that level? Like, all I know is the talent that I played against. Yeah, he played against, people against Toronto, but, or in Toronto in that league, and some older geezers in the men's league. But now you're being selected to the elite players across the country.
Right.
How do you stack up?
Well, and listen to this quote, and I want to thank Paul James, by the way, for contributing to a fantastic quote that is, to me, it gives a lot of meat and potatoes to this, because you get to see the admiration Paul had for Steve, especially when us during that time at Windsor, eagerly awaiting the results after every training session, and hearing all these legendary stories about Paul James and the fitness sessions and how he would rollick Steve all practice long.
I was there at those.
So was I. I went to a couple of those.
You stayed at my sister's.
But allow me to read this, because this is something I can't wait for my brother to hear. Paul James writes, Steve Arce should have played for the Canadian men's World Cup team. He would have been a stalwart, roving left-sided player. The problem for Steve was that as a 19-year-old, he had an allergic reaction to 4-mile runs in 100-degree heat, 100% humidity at 12 noon each day, and an assessment coach at that time named Paul James. Had we not have committed the team to so much physical running in the preparation for the FIFA World Youth Championship qualifiers, Steve would have played for our Canadian U20 team in Trinidad and Tobago. Not to be discounted that had he lived in Toronto, then or now, he would have made it to the highest level. A missed gem of a soccer player as a consequence of such poor Canadian soccer infrastructure back in 1998. And he went on to say in another email afterwards that Patrice Bernier said that it was the hardest physical training he's had to endure in his career, training with Paul James. When I read that, Mike, so many emotions came through me, because I can remember Steve coming home and saying, "We didn't touch a ball, for an hour today," and then when we finally did, we had 2v2s spanning the whole field, 2v2s against guys that were quicker than him in his sleep, and I remember Steve feeling just that he's not physically cut out for it.
Well, how can you possibly identify who's good? Who's actually good? Who's a good soccer player?
Right. Yeah. I think it would be hard, but I think at that level, and I'm just assuming, because the highest levels that I've reached have been the lower U.S. college divisions and the CIAU. But I remember
the memories.
I remember fitness when I went out west being massive, so important, because if you're not fit, you can't operate properly. And
yeah, but if you can play and you're fit, if you can't play and you're fit, then you're useless.
You're right if you can't play, but I think, like Paul was saying here, his concerns were, does he have a roster full of players to undergo that heat against your Mexicos, your USAs, where they don't really have to worry about fitness being that big of an issue. But I think. Sorry, go on. No, because when one of the things Paul said to Steve when Steve first went on to the national team, he said, Steve, I just want to say we're going to work on your fitness, or you need to work on your fitness, but technically speaking, as a player, you are sublime. When Steve told me that, and the compliment that Paul gave him, Steve was over the moon. In his mind, he couldn't do any wrong with the ball. Coming from Paul James, that was massive. But I remember it was the comments by Paul James when Steve couldn't finish a run, or maybe he was coming in last on a run, that were destroying him, because he just thought, I'm good pals with guys like Ryan Dodds and some of the other boys that he was hanging around with, and Steve felt he was, technically there with them, but it was hard to. I think it was hard to see guys like Dodds and the other boys excel so effortlessly on the fitness side of things. In Windsor, we were never taught that. We were never given quantitative analytics to say, all right, Steve, listen, you want to get fit for the national team, this is what you're going to have to do week in and week out. It wasn't until he went to the national team trials where he came home with a booklet as to what he needed to do every day.
Well, that's where he became a big boy, in the sense of, now you're on the big boy stage, and this is how they operate. You're on that next level, that next tier. Nothing in Windsor at that time could have prepared him for that. Nor would you have ever expected that he was in an era at that time that required that much fitness and that much running. And back to the fitness point is, everybody's got to be fit. I think fitness is marginal at the top level, though, in the sense of everybody's fit already. They're running, they're working hard. To be at that stage, there's a threshold of fitness where where the differences are I think minimal. Like I don't think a lot of teams, and I could be completely wrong, but when I look back, I go, I don't think there's a lot of teams that are that are just way more fit, and that they're going to outfit you out of the game. That there are guys and teams that are going to beat you, but you need the skill mixed in with the fitness. You have to be so my point is, at that level, you've got all these guys that are going to be fit. They're coming in, they're 16, 17, 18 years old. They're fit. They can run. Run them, get them acclimated. But if you're just doing that, you're going to pass up on a guy, or worse, you're going to perhaps turn off a guy that may have otherwise committed his whole life to the game and said, fuck, this isn't what I trained my whole life for, was to run up and down 2v2s in anticipation of a World Cup, to think that that's going to make me more prepared. And I don't know that, and I could be wrong, and that's just my opinion, because I sat on the sidelines going, this can't be useful. And no offense to a guy like Paul James, who is an incredible coach and a stalwart in our Canadian system, is a pundit and knows far more than I ever did. But I was standing on the sideline, I knew that those guys weren't going to stand a chance because they didn't touch a ball.
Right.
The lack of footwork, the lack of just again practice that occurred. Well, I didn't expect it. Like, even as a sideline, I got tired as I was eating a bag of chips on the sideline, watching them play. I was out of breath, going, and that was practice, and then practice would end.
Yeah,
and it was just fitness. But what we're saying is that we need to identify the best players. And so my point is that you couldn't possibly identify the best players, or some of the best players may have been overlooked, because there was such a focus on fitness. And I think that era of the game in this country, to Paul's credit, and good on him for admitting it, didn't bode well, didn't marry
with Steve's ability. Steve had just such supreme ability, and I saw it. I mean, there was glimpses when they did touch the ball. You could see who the best players were. You could identify him. He was the best player on that team, without a doubt. And there are guys that I know in my world that I've sort of in the workforce that I've associated with down the years later, and his name comes up, and it's always not the what ifs, but he was a great player. He was a good player. He had a great left foot. And back to the left foot thing, I don't think Steve was just a great left-sided player, and I think that's where Paul had it wrong. In my opinion, he should have been in the middle on that team.
Right.
He shouldn't have been left back. He was misused. He shouldn't have been left on the left wing. He was misused because if you're trying to get a guy fit and to play at that level, you can't put a guy with that level of fitness on his own outside, on the outside, or as a left back. You needed to disguise his fitness because you could get through a game. Steve was a smart enough player that he could manage a 90-minute game at that age, at 16, 17, 18 years old. And back to my point was, when you're playing the World Cup or you're playing at that level, he was fit enough to play a long period of time, 80, 90 minutes, particularly at that age.
Right.
That I think he got left out. He still excelled in those positions, in the spots that he played. He excelled. He played well. He stood out in a lot of those games, a lot of the friendlies, in anticipation of the camp that before they went, when he got selected to go to camp, before the World Cup. But I think, again, to his quote, a great left-sided player. I don't know that he was a left-sided player. There's not a player in this country that I've seen, even in this era, our recent era, that, and this is a big statement, but I've seen a lot of players, and I've watched and played against and played with, but I don't know that there was a better player that I could sit there and say, oh, no. He was a way better player than Steve, and he should be in the middle of the park over Steve.
Right.
Or he should be conducting or orchestrating how we're going to move the ball and get it to our attackers. There wasn't a better passer of the ball through seams, better through ball passer than Steve.
Yeah.
There wasn't a guy who could turn with his back to the net in the middle of the park better than Steve.
Yeah. No, you're right. He was so cerebral. It's tough to think of him outside of the middle. But going back to the fitness thing, and going into the MSU thing as well. Out of the years that he played at MSU, his first year, to me, is the sharpest he ever looked.
I'd agree.
Because he
was so fit.
He was so bloody fit, and
excuse me.
He put he again, sharp, fit. His transition was unbelievable.
Well, again,
and the thing about it, his skills did shine. I think he led the team in assists that year. And I don't know how many times he played in the middle for MSU in his freshman year season, but watching him play, watching him make a difference, for me, that first year was ridiculous. But the best year, where he made the most difference, was his last year at MSU, when I think the cerebral...
We forgot the departure. Sorry, we forgot the departure of the Canadian national team.
Yeah,
were we going to touch on that?
No.
Or not a dark spot. That's the one. Well, look, why should we not touch on that? Sorry.
Yeah.
Because it's the what ifs and the should haves, right? I mean,
right.
Paul James said it. But that and that's not a bad thing, because that departure led him to Michigan State and a legendary career there.
That's right.
It just he zigged instead of or zagged, in the sense that you kind of knew that his Canadian career was over, and he was just going to excel. That this was his path, was a high level, Division I, University I education and playing experience, and we all benefited from that decision, but because we all enjoyed our time there. But I still felt his place in the game was playing for our country. The problem is, a guy like that, it was the wrong era.
Yeah.
He was on the cusp of it, where soccer changed in this country. He was just an era before.
Yeah, you're right. He was caught in a transitional period.
Yeah, he was caught in a transitional period.
But-
and he made the best decision for him at that time. But yeah, he should have been on the Canadian national team playing.
Well, you know what? I think there was a lot of guys on that team, even when they were done their careers over in the States, they could have gone on to perform better things in their career. I'm not sure how many people did. You always hear about the ones that made it, like Patrice Bernier and Ryan Dodds made it. You know, made a good career in Scotland as well. And I know I'm forgetting others, but I can remember Steve after his last year of MSU, which again for me was his best year. He was involved in every play. He was just so instrumental for them, scoring goals and setting everything up. That he told me one day, "Hey, did you hear the news?" And I said, "What news?" He says, "I got drafted." I said, "By who? What
Montreal
draft for
Impact,
what?"
7th overall or something?
Montreal Impact. He goes, "I'm not doing that." Like it was some kind of compulsory thing that he may have to do, but it was his buddy Robbie from the Canadian national team, I think, who had phoned him and said, "Hey, you and I got drafted. Are you going to go?" And I remember Steve saying, "No, he's not going to redo that again." I mean, I think by that time,
it wasn't the era.
No, it wasn't the era, and I think the realism. I remember him always telling me he didn't want to be a soccer bum. He didn't want to bounce around from team to team to team, chasing coin that wasn't going to be there.
Well, there was no.
Yeah, I think ultimately he made a great decision.
Yeah.
Of going to MSU, and look what it led to. A beautiful family, a great life in Michigan, and 2 jobs staying in Windsor, Ontario, giving him an hour-long homage that he can listen to on the way to work. But I ultimately, and not to be too philosophical, if it weren't for the Paul James and the Canadian adventure that he went on, I don't see him having the same success at the MSU level, because I think that hardened him in a way. Because when we go from Paul James to no disrespect to Joe Baum, there's a big difference there.
Well, it was like going back to not the high school, high-level high school, right? In the sense that where he was, again, that elite player, but now his skills were at an optimum level, and his fitness, to the credit of the Canadian national team at the time, I guess, was that they got him prepared for that. I mean, he could just, he was so fit that he could just walk in there and just do his thing. The one thing in terms of his decision making, and only Steve knows, was that he was always a step ahead, whether it was in his soccer career or his acknowledgement of himself, that he knew that he wasn't going to be a journeyman soccer player playing in the A-League or some third division in Europe, because he wasn't nationalized, and it was way more difficult for a foreigner, particularly Canadian, to even get eyeballs.
Absolutely.
That the road would have been far more difficult for him. Probably would have stuck it out, and to be fair, I think he could have had opportunities had he thrown himself into it. I think that experience I think the life experience of the Canadian national team changed his perception of the world.
Could be.
And he realized that I'm going to go to school, I'm going to get a good education, I'm going to get it paid for, I'm going to have a great time, I'm going to play some high level soccer, and I'm going to be really good, and I'm going to get what I need out of the game.
Yeah.
Had he went across the pond and to be fair, and maybe it turned him off in a way where it allowed him to appreciate that direction and wanted him to go in that direction. You know what I mean? It was the decision that he needed to make at that time. Because he although, and again, I'll go back to, you guys together, all you did was play soccer in the backyard. That was your life. Soccer, football, soccer, play it, watch it, think about it. and now he made it to the pinnacle. Under all the scrutiny that he had been under from local pundits, local players, older players who said he wasn't good enough, he wasn't going to make it, he was a shithead, he was too weak. You're never. I remember being just the shrapnel coming off from people, hearing that, but the one thing, Steve had the passion, but I think Canada, the Canadians, and I say the Canadian soccer, and I think that they've done it to many, and I don't think that Steve is in a vacuum when it comes to, really good soccer players that have been deflated by the system. I think Steve realized that the passion for the game wasn't such that he wanted to commit everything to it. And when he could, because he saw it, and what he saw, I don't know that he loved. That didn't bring out the best in him.
Right.
Like training the way they trained and treating them the way they, again, no disrespect, but that system at that time in that era wasn't the fit for Steve. He was too cerebral. He knew that they had to play the game a different way. He knew that in order for them to excel, he had to be used in a different way. He was ahead of his time in terms of the game, and in terms of the game and the way it was developing in Canada. And because of that, he went to Michigan, chose the Michigan State route. And because of that, it prepared him to be, for that university game, and he excelled at it. But he proved all his doubters wrong. He was able to play in the college game. He was able to keep up with the physicality of it. Again, you heard every guy who played in our city who thought that they were better than they were say that he wasn't going to make it. And Steve was very matter of fact about how he played on the field and how he acted off it. It was like, fuck you, I'm going to just do my thing. And I look skinny and I look thin, but I'm still going to fight you off a ball and hold you off a ball that you can't get from me, no matter how big and tall you are.
Yeah.
And when he went to Michigan State, I think he just brought that there, and he was able to. Again, when I saw him there, when we saw him there, it's hard pressed to think there was, a better player that he played with there. He was still the best player out of those 4 or 5 years that he was there, one of, if not. And to Joe Bob's credit, when he retired years later, and he announced his all-time 11 best players that he played for him since 40-year coach, 60s. The 60s he was the coach there. Imagine how many teams and how many players he must have coached.
I can only
and this was 10 years later after Steve was there. So now he's thinking about 10 years later, even after Steve was there, the center midfielder that he chose and is all
Spartan team
was him.
Yeah, it's a great accolade.
Yeah, it's that just, for me, that always just summed it up. And again, that just summed it up. That he maximized his time there for sure. Yeah. Not only that, he met Bridget and they had a great family and all the memories and the hangers on like me, you, and Dave, but and everybody that came there. Yeah. But that if that's what his purpose in life was, to go get that scholarship, so that we could all reap
go benefits. Witness it and take part in it, then no, I agree to that. But you know what? I think we're at the end, and just want to say a big happy birthday to you, Stevie. Again, this purpose of this little mini beta podcast. Hopefully the first of many podcast. Was just to let you know how much we appreciate what you did. We don't often say it, but again, hopefully something you can bore the kids with one day. And again, just a show dedicated to yourself. So I hopefully we made some chronological sense with how much you achieved and how much Steve did. how much he did for the city in general by doing what he did. But I'd like to thank Mike. I'd like to thank Paul James. I'd like to thank the others who contributed with anecdotes, etc., etc. So again, thanks again, Stevie. We love you, and talk to you soon. Again, hope you enjoyed the podcast, and hopefully you all stay tuned for the roast/interview with the self-proclaimed best backyard soccer player in the city of Windsor, David Jazz, for the next podcast. Mike, any last words?
No, just on that note, the backyard that you speak of is Remington Park, which is right around the corner, and there's been some special moments there. Dave has been at the front and center of most of them.
All right, everybody, thank you very much for listening to us, and we'll see you soon.